She was 3,000 miles away from home, losing a tennis match after midnight, and somehow that was a moment 8,000 people in a Manila arena screamed louder than they had all night. If you think that sentence doesn't make sense, stay with me, because by the end of this you're going to understand exactly why a country stayed up past midnight to watch someone lose, and why that loss might be the biggest thing to happen to Philippine sport in 27 years. There's a piece of the story near the very end, something Eala said with her own mouth about ruffled socks and chubby cheeks, that I promise you will not see coming. And once you hear it, you will understand why an entire arena refused to go home even after the scoreboard turned against her. So don't skip ahead. Before we go there, I need 30 seconds of your time, and I'm not going to waste it. Channels like this one live or die on one thing, and it's not views, it's people who actually decide to stick around. Somewhere out there is a story about an athlete, a comeback, a moment nobody else is telling properly, and the only way you hear about it the day it happens is if you're subscribed. I'm not asking you to do me a favor. I'm asking you to not miss the next one of these, because stories like Eala's don't come around often, and when they do, you want to already be here for it. Hit subscribe now, because what's coming the next few minutes is going to make you glad you did. Rewind 3 years. There's a graduation ceremony on the island of Mallorca at the academy that carries Rafael Nadal's name. The woman handing out diplomas that day is IGA Swiatek, freshly crowned French Open champion. Sitting at world number 1, one of the students walking up to shake her hand and take a certificate is a teenager from Quezon City named Eala. Nobody in that room could have told you that 3 years later, almost to the day, the student would walk onto Wimbledon center court and beat the teacher. But she did. July 4th, 2026. A first-set tiebreak that stretched all the way to 11 points. And when it was over, the crowd stood up not out of politeness, but because they had just watched something rare happen in real time. Here's the number that puts it in perspective, and it's worth sitting with. Before Eala, the highest-ranked Filipina in the history of women's professional tennis was a player named Maricris Gentuya, who reached number 284 in the world back in 1999. 27 years ago, Eala herself has already climbed to a career high of number 29. Do the math on that gap. It's not a small jump. It's not even a big jump. It's an entirely different staircase built where there wasn't one before. And that's exactly the question this story forces you to ask, the one we're not going to dodge. Is this a fairy tale that fades in a few months, or is this a permanent shift in what Philippine tennis is capable of? Keep that question in your head, because the answer is as obvious as it looks, and we're going to walk through the evidence together. Start with a fairy tale argument, because it deserves to be heard honestly. She's 21. She doesn't have a WTA singles title yet. Just weeks before Wimbledon, she was ranked in her 60s. This is her first real deep run at a Grand Slam. If you wanted to argue this is a beautiful moment that quietly disappears, the numbers give you just enough room to make that case. But then look at what actually led up to Wimbledon. Earlier this year, she hit that career high of 29, a number no Filipina had ever come close to. She won a grass court title in Birmingham. She reached the semifinal in Berlin, beating a top 5 player along the way. She was invited to play doubles alongside Venus Williams. And then she arrived at Wimbledon seated for the first time in her career and beat the defending champion on the tournament's biggest court. That's not a lightning strike story. That's a pattern. This wasn't even the first time she'd beaten Swiatek. She'd already done it once before, back in Miami in 2025. Beating the same all-time great twice in 15 months isn't luck. It's something a scoreboard can't explain away. Now, picture the match itself, because this is where the story stops being about rankings and starts being about a feeling that spread across an entire ocean. Center court, evening slot, the roof closed, the defending champion across the net. Eala saved 8 of the 11 break points thrown at her. She hit more winners and unforced errors in a match everyone expected her to be overwhelmed in. One major outlet called it possibly the toughest loss the champion had faced all year. And it wasn't because the champion played badly. It was because she got beaten. When the final point landed, Wimbledon's own coverage showed the crowd rising to their feet, not out of sympathy, but out of respect for a result nobody handed her. And while that was happening on the grass in London, something almost stranger was happening everywhere else in the world at the same time. In Melbourne, in Berlin, in Toronto, in Birmingham, in San Francisco, Filipino flags started appearing in the stands of matches. She wasn't even playing that day, just because people wanted to be near it. Weeks earlier at the Australian Open, fans had queued outside a practice court, not to watch her play a match, but just to watch her hit balls in practice. A practice court. Overcapacity. Ask yourself when you've ever heard of that happening for a tennis player from a country with almost no tennis history at all. That's the part of the story I want you to really sit with for a second, because it's the part that explains the Midnight Arena. This wasn't a diaspora flown in from Manila for the occasion. These were nurses, engineers, students, and families who had already been living in Birmingham, in Berlin, in Melbourne, in Toronto for years, who had never once had a reason to gather around a tennis court, and suddenly did. That's not a fan base. That's a country finding a mirror it didn't know existed, in a sport it never expected to see itself in. One of the most respected voices in American tennis, a former Olympic doubles gold medalist who has spent 3 decades watching the sport's audience evolve. Put it simply, this is next level, and it's bringing an entirely new crowd to the game. That's not a Filipino commentator being generous to a Filipino athlete. That's an American tennis legend telling an American audience that a 21-year-old from the Philippines just did something the sport itself hadn't managed to do on its own. And behind the scenes, her coach, a veteran who's worked with her since 2023, says the daily job was never really about the wins. It was about teaching a 21-year-old how to filter out the noise, how to stay focused on one achievable goal at a time. That quiet, unglamorous work is exactly why what happened 2 days after the Swiatek when didn't turn into a meltdown. Because here's the part of the story you can't skip past. And I promise you at the start we weren't going to sugarcoat it. 2 days later, in the round of 16, Jasmine Paolini took the first set from Eala. Eala fought back and won the second. And that's the exact moment the Manila Arena erupted, the moment I opened this whole story with. Then the third set slipped away, and Alex Eala's Wimbledon ended in a loss. That has to be said plainly, because a story that pretends otherwise stops respecting the person it's supposedly honoring. What she did next is the real proof of everything we just walked through. She didn't blame the court, the schedule, or the crowd. She told reporters there were so many positives to take from the run. No excuses, no spiral, just an honest accounting of what went right and what didn't. Months earlier, she had openly admitted feeling overwhelmed by the sheer number of fans lining up just to watch a practice. The difference between that admission and the composure she showed walking off center court after a loss is 6 months of visible growth, in real time, in front of millions of people. So here's where all of it lands. A 21-year-old beat a defending Wimbledon champion on the tournament's biggest court, lost her very next match with total honesty 2 days later, and told the truth about both. A country stood up an 8,000-seat arena after midnight to watch her play, and didn't leave even after she lost. And the old ceiling, a ranking of 284 set 27 years ago, isn't even a comparison point anymore. It's just a mark on the wall of a building she's already standing on the roof of. And here's the line I told you we'd get to, the one this entire story has been building toward. After beating Swiatek, Eala said she used to train every day after school in ruffled socks and light-up shoes with chubby cheeks, and that the win was for the version of herself who did that, for her family, and for every girl out there who looks just like she used to. 3 years ago, on a stage in Mallorca, Swiatek handed her a piece of paper. On July 4th, Eala handed Swiatek a loss. And stitched onto the visor she wears on every court in the world are a few words in Tagalog that roughly translate to this. Once it starts growing, it cannot be stopped. The arena in Manila isn't going anywhere. And neither, it seems, is she. The U.S. Open is only weeks away. And if this story pulled at you even a little, subscribe now, because we'll be right here for every single chapter of what happens next, and something tells you the next one is going to be even bigger.